The sharp, digital chime of my personal smartphone cut through the absolute, suffocating silence of my small home office at exactly 2:14 a.m. It was a low, rhythmic alert. A custom-coded frequency that I had programmed years ago, reserved exclusively for high-priority, critical banking transactions. I opened the secure financial application, my hazel green eyes narrowing in the darkness as the intense glare of the screen illuminated my face. There, stamped in cold, electronic font under my checking account balance at Apex Horizon National Bank, was a dynamic sequence of numbers that made the breath instantly freeze inside my throat. Total available balance, $34 million. There was no descriptive wire transfer memo attached to the ledger. There was no institutional sender name, no corporate clearing code, and no legitimate commercial tracking ID. It was just a raw, multi-million-dollar capital injection sitting quietly, dangerously, inside the personal checking account of an ordinary, underpaid corporate compliance clerk. To an average civilian, a sudden $34 million deposit would look like a miracle, a historic stroke of financial luck that would permanently alter their destiny. But to my highly trained, forensic compliance mind, that exact number looked like a dynamic, high-velocity corporate execution order. I didn't see sudden wealth. I saw the dirty, toxic digital footprint of a massive international money laundering operation. The velocity of the transfer, the lack of clearing metadata, and the specific routing path indicated that my personal account had been deliberately weaponized as a buffer entity. A fall address designed to absorb the absolute destruction when the federal authorities inevitably deployed their compliance firewalls. I stood up slowly from my wooden desk, walking over to the panoramic glass window of my living room. Outside, the night was buried under a heavy, black curtain of pouring rain, the drops cloaking Pemrook Lane in a bleak, freezing mist. I didn't need a corporate audit to know exactly where this illicit capital had originated. For 4 long years, I had lived as a quiet, unassuming, and submissive wife to Julian Vance, a flashy, newly rich venture capital director who constantly bragged about his high society connections, his elite country club access, and his aggressive, market-beating trading algorithms. But tonight, the chaotic puzzle pieces fell into a perfect, terrifying alignment. Julian and his toxic, arrogant sister, Valerie Vance, weren't financial geniuses. They were white-collar parasites who had been moving illicit capital through the structural backdoors of the banking sector to cover their massive, unhedged market losses. And they had just used my identity as their ultimate human shield. The heavy oak front door of the house suddenly burst open with a loud, aggressive crash, shattering the quiet sanctuary of the night. Julian marched into the living room, his expensive tailored Italian silk suit completely soaked from the rain, radiating an intense odor of vintage cognac and expensive cigars. He was followed closely by his sister, Valerie, who was clutching a thick leather designer briefcase, a sharp, triumphant, and predatory sneer plastered across her face. They did not look like worried family members returning home from a late-night crisis. They radiated the supreme, narcissistic arrogance of hunters who believed they had successfully caged and cornered their prey. "Wake up, Vivian!" Julian roared, throwing a thick stack of legal post-nuptial asset-waiver documents violently onto the glass coffee table, sending my porcelain cup crashing onto the hardwood floor, shattering it into pieces. "The game is officially over, you boring mouse. My sister and I have just finalized the major international restructuring of Vance Venture Capital. We are officially entering the highest tier of the financial elite, and a low-wage, nameless compliance clerk like you is nothing but dead weight to my high society brand." Valerie stepped forward, her manicured fingers pointing directly at my face, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated venom. "You should be on your knees thanking Julian for even allowing a charity case orphan like you to live in this house for 4 years. Vivian! You have no elite lineage, no family wealth, and your entire pathetic existence consists of typing transaction codes into spreadsheet registries. We have already authorized our private security to clear your cheap wardrobe from the master suite. Your belongings have been stuffed into black plastic trash bags outside the garage gates. Sign the asset waiver, accept a $10,000 settlement, and cut out of our city before sunrise. I looked down at the legal waiver on the table, then looked back at Julian's smug, arrogant face with an icy, mechanical calm that caused his smile to slightly twitch at the corners. They truly believed they were banishing a helpless, broken girl into the mud. What their fragile, narcissistic minds could never comprehend was that my simple life as a compliance clerk was a temporary choice. My true identity was Vivian Sterling, the legendary, hidden lead architect who designed the very anti-money laundering core software that monitored 90% of the country's banking infrastructure. And they had just dumped $34 million of dirty money directly into the master kill switch of my network. "Julian," I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, terrifyingly clear tone that cut clean through his loud posturing. I reached into my coat pocket, turning the screen of my smartphone toward his eyes, showing the flashing $34 million balance. "Before you execute this public divorce, you might want to explain why your private venture capital clearing codes are stamped all over this illegal international wire transfer inside my personal ledger." The sudden, unexpected revelation of the $34 million balance did not cause Julian Vance to panic. Instead, his chest puffed out with a dark, calculated level of newly rich vanity. He exchanged a knowing, sinister glance with his sister, Valerie, before letting out a loud, mocking laugh that echoed horribly off the walls of the dark living room. "Do you actually think you can threaten me with a simple banking error, Vivian?" Julian sneered, stepping closer until his expensive cologne completely invaded my space, his eyes filled with absolute contempt and patriarchal dominance. "You are a low-level data clerk. You understand spreadsheet cells, but you know absolutely nothing about how high society capital operates. That money is perfectly cleared. I have the absolute backing of the senior executive board at Apex Horizon National Bank. If you try to blow a whistle on this transaction, the system will chew you up, brand you as a digital thief, and permanently delete your career before the morning market opens." "He's right, Vivian," Valerie cackled, her diamond rings catching the ambient light as she tapped her leather briefcase against the table. "We have already flagged your name in our Central Human Resources directory. If a single word of this deposit leaves this room, we will file a formal corporate embezzlement report against you. You will spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary while Julian and I enjoy our palace. Sign the papers, walk into the rain, and run along." I didn't waste another millisecond exchanging useless words with the parasites. The moment the grandfather clock in the hallway struck 8 a.m. the following morning, I bypassed the local branch networks entirely, driving directly to the corporate headquarters of Apex Horizon National Bank. A massive, cold tower of steel and dark glass that stood like a monument to institutional greed in the center of the financial district. I marched straight past the security barriers, entering the executive suite of Marcus Cross, the senior vice president of executive operations, the exact man whose digital signature authorized Julian's corporate trading lines. Marcus Cross sat behind his massive, dark obsidian desk, his gold watch catching the sunlight, his expression a wall of cold, condescending corporate arrogance. He didn't even look at the certified forensic audit printout I placed directly onto his desk. "Miss Brooks," Marcus Cross said, his voice smooth, clinical, and completely dismissive, treating me like an annoying insect. "I have already reviewed your account query. The $34 million deposit is not an administrative error, nor is it a system glitch. The transaction has been fully verified by our Tier 1 clearinghouse. Our compliance framework has determined that your personal name was specifically flagged as the legitimate beneficiary of this international trust distribution. The bank denies all liability, and this matter is permanently closed. I suggest you go home and enjoy your sudden wealth instead of harassing my executive board with groundless compliance theories." I leaned forward against his obsidian desk, my hazel green eyes narrowing into sharp slits of absolute, untouchable old money ice. "You are lying, Mr. Cross," I whispered, my voice carrying an imperial weight that caused his smug, corporate expression to instantly freeze. "You didn't verify a trust distribution. You deliberately misdirected a high-velocity shadow wire transfer through a shell entity to clear Julian's illegal offshore debts, and you used my personal routing number as a dead-end fall address to blind the regulators. You truly believe your vice president credentials protect you from scrutiny. But you forgot one foundational reality of this financial system. I am the person who built the operating system you are trying to exploit. Marcus Cross's eyes violently widened for a fraction of a second, a sudden, primitive flash of panic washing over his face before he quickly forced his cold, corporate mask back into place. He let out a dry, forced chuckle, leaning back into his leather executive chair, adjusting his heavy gold cufflinks with an aggressive motion. Your imagination is quite vivid for a low-level clerk, Miss Brooks, Marcus Cross said, his voice hardening into a direct, chilling threat. But out here in the real world, words mean absolutely nothing without institutional leverage. You have exactly zero evidence to back up these absurd allegations. As far as the federal regulators are concerned, your signature is on the account. The $34 million is in your possession, and if an investigation happens, you will be the only one carried out of this tower in handcuffs. I am giving you one final warning. Drop this inquiry, resign from your compliance position, and walk out of my office before I have corporate security permanently blacklist your name from every financial network in the state. I didn't offer him a single word of reply. I simply picked up my folder, turned on my heel, and walked straight out of the executive suite. They thought they had built an unbreachable fortress of institutional denial. They thought a broke, faceless wife could be easily crushed, framed, and silenced for their white-collar crimes. The moment I stepped into the grand marble lobby of the tower, I pulled out my secure, unlisted satellite phone, a device completely isolated from the public communications grid, and dialed the direct, maximum priority hotline of the Sterling Global Trust Legal Division. "Dominic," I commanded coldly, as the encrypted line connected on the very first ring. "The compliance humility trial is officially terminated. Julian Vance, Valerie Vance, and Senior Vice President Marcus Cross have just activated a 0-hour international money laundering node, utilizing my personal account as their buffer. I have just authorized the Master Forensic Transaction Report to be uploaded to the Federal Registry. Activate our private legal trust detail. It is time to execute a total material liquidation of Apex Horizon National Bank. Understood, Chairman Sterling." Dominic's deep, baritone voice replied with absolute, religious reverence. "The Sterling legal forces are already mobilizing. We will breach their perimeter before the evening market closes." The rain outside on Pemrook Lane had intensified into a thunderous, apocalyptic deluge, washing away the superficial glow of the city's financial district. But I was no longer standing in the dark living room of my modest brick house. At exactly 11:45 p.m., a private, armored vehicle cleared the maximum security checkpoints of the Sovereign Heritage Club, a highly restricted, century-old private library boardroom hidden deep within the limestone architecture of old money Manhattan. The air inside the room was thick with the scent of aged mahogany, vintage leather, and absolute, institutional power. Sitting around the massive obsidian conference table were 3 individuals who carried the hidden, foundational weight of the country's alternative financial ecosystem, the chief executive directors of the Federal Credit Union Alliance. These weren't flashy, newly rich venture capitalists like Julian Vance who begged for media attention. These were the silent gatekeepers of generational community liquidity, controlling over $70 billion in localized capital reserves. I stepped into the room, my simple gray trench coat soaked with rain, but as I pulled it off, revealing a structured charcoal silk blazer, the 3 aging financial titans instantly stood up in perfect, synchronal reverence. They did not see an underpaid insurance data clerk. They saw the grand matriarch of the Sterling Transaction Monitoring Network. Chairman Sterling, Eleanor Caldwell, the senior matriarch of the Credit Union Alliance, spoke in a low, deeply respectful tone as she pulled out the heavy leather chair for me. "The moment your encrypted signature hit our private mainframe, we initiated an emergency security sweep. We have already reviewed the forensic data packet you uploaded. It is an absolute abomination. Apex Horizon National Bank has actively allowed its executive board to harbor toxic international laundering nodes. Marcus Cross believes he is completely untouchable because his bank clears Tier 1 commercial transactions for the public sector. I said, my voice dropping into a freezing, calculated calm that caused the room to turn dead silent. I placed my secure tablet onto the Obsidian table, illuminating the dynamic flowcharts of Julian Vance's fraudulent $34 million buffer deposit. Julian and his sister Valerie have systematically used my personal account numbers to mask their insolvency. Marcus Cross didn't just look the other way. He manually altered the overnight clearing scripts to authorize this transaction. They believe they have built an unbreachable wall of institutional denial. They believe that by sunrise, they can file a forged embezzlement report, arrest me, and bury the data forever. Eleanor Caldwell let out a sharp, cold laugh, her silver rings catching the low amber light of the chandelier. They are playing a high-stakes game with cardboard shields, Vivian. They truly do not comprehend that the entire interbank lending framework relies on our liquidity pools to clear their daily balances. Apex Horizon National Bank is structurally overleveraged. If we pull the plug on their overnight clearing lines, their entire vault network will starve before the federal regulators even enter the lobby. That is exactly why I summoned you tonight, Eleanor, I whispered, my hazel green eyes narrowing into sharp, predatory slits of absolute old money sovereignty. I want a total, 0-hour commercial foreclosure executed against Apex Horizon National Bank. At exactly 4 a.m., before the international pre-market trading desks activate, I want the Federal Credit Union Alliance to permanently freeze and terminate all overnight lending facilities, interbank clearing bridges, and reciprocal liquidity lines associated with Marcus Cross's sector. We are not just going to audit them, Eleanor. We are going to completely starve their infrastructure. The three titans didn't hesitate for a single millisecond. With a swift, coordinated motion, they opened their secure cryptographic ledger terminals, inserting their private security keys into the mainframe. The financial embargo is officially initiated, Chairman Sterling, Eleanor announced, her face hardening into a wall of unyielding stone as she pressed the master execution command. Apex Horizon National Bank has just been completely isolated from the community liquidity grid. They are officially bleeding out in the dark. At exactly 1:30 a.m., miles away from the secure limestone walls of the Sovereign Heritage Club, a sleek, black armored luxury sedan glided quietly through the fog-drenched corridors of the city's warehouse district. Inside the vehicle, Dominic Sterling sat in the rear passenger suite, the soft blue light of a forensic laptop illuminating his sharp, chiseled features as his fingers systematically organized the final federal grand jury indictment files against Julian Vance. Suddenly, the violent, screeching roar of heavy rubber tires shattered the quiet of the industrial avenue. Two massive, non-registered black SUVs violently accelerated from the shadows, their high-beam headlights blinding the driver as they executed a highly aggressive, military-grade intercept maneuver. They slammed their heavy reinforced bumpers directly into the front and rear of Dominic's sedan, boxing the luxury vehicle completely into a freezing, dark concrete dead end. Four towering, heavily armed private security enforcers, dressed in sterile black tactical gear with their faces completely obscured by ballistic masks, marched out of the SUVs. These weren't standard corporate guards. These were elite, high-priced underworld mercenaries hired directly through the shadow accounts of Vance Venture Capital and Marcus Cross's Black Budget Protection Network. They carried heavy steel breaching tools and high-caliber weapons, their movements radiating an aura of brutal, lawless violence. The leader of the mercenary squad violently smashed the heavy butt of his weapon against the reinforced ballistic glass of Dominic's window, leaving a spiderweb crack in the premium laminate. "Step out of the vehicle, lawyer!" The mercenary roared through the rain, his hoarse voice amplified by a tactical throat microphone. "Open the door and surrender the master forensic storage drives right now, or we will deploy a thermal breaching charge and incinerate this entire chassis with you inside it. Your old money court papers mean absolutely nothing out here in the dark." Inside the rear suite, Dominic Sterling did not flinch. He did not show a single, solitary micro-expression of fear, anxiety, or human vulnerability. He slowly, methodically closed his laptop, adjusted the perfect knot of his silk tie, and unlatched the heavy armored door, stepping out into the pouring rain with a chilling, sub-zero composure that instantly stunned the armed mercenaries. Dominic stood completely straight under the torrential downpour, his tailored charcoal overcoat absorbing the water, his arms calmly folded behind his back as he looked at the four armed men pointing weapons at his chest. "You are executing an exceptionally low IQ operation, gentlemen," Dominic said, his deep, baritone voice dropping into a tone of quiet, tyrannical authority that vibrated with absolute old money supremacy. He didn't look like a man surrounded by killers. He looked like a sovereign lord reviewing a group of misbehaved peasants. "You truly believe that Julian Vance and Marcus Cross possess the sustainable capital to protect your families after tonight. You believe that a $60,000 shadow wire transfer into your offshore accounts can purchase immunity for executing an armed assault against a primary trustee of the Sterling Global Trust." The mercenary leader slightly hesitated, his weapon visibly twitching as Dominic's words cut through his professional conditioning. "Shut your mouth! Hand over the digital ledger directories, or you die right here! Look at your personal tactical communication feeds," Dominic commanded coldly, his eyes narrowing into narrow slits of absolute ice. On that exact second, the automated satellite wrist monitors of all four mercenaries violently flashed with an urgent, rhythmic crimson alert code. The private, unlisted banking applications on their encrypted tactical phones were simultaneously wiped out, replaced by a cold, automated legal notice from the Federal Financial Registry. "What the hell is this?" One of the mercenaries gasped, his voice cracking into pure, primitive panic as he stared at his device. "My offshore shell account? It's completely frozen! The entire balance has been seized under a Category 1 federal asset forfeiture warrant. My home address, my family's real estate assets, they have just been placed under a comprehensive surveillance block. The Sterling mainframe records every single entity that touches the payroll of Vance Venture Capital," Dominic whispered, stepping closer to the mercenary leader, completely ignoring the barrel of the gun pressed against his chest. "Before you walked into this alley tonight, your identities were unmasked, your bank accounts were liquidated, and your entire operational cell was categorized as an active international terrorist financing node. If you pull that trigger, you are not committing a simple homicide. You are permanently erasing your family's financial existence from the civilized world for the next 3 generations." The heavy weapons slowly, pathetically lowered into the wet gravel. The 4 towering mercenaries stood completely paralyzed under the pouring rain, their faces pale behind their ballistic masks, their chests heaving with an absolute, crushing realization of their total impotence against old money power. Dominic turned his back on them, stepping calmly back into the rear seat of his armored sedan. "Clear the vehicles out of my path," Dominic commanded through the open window, his voice dropping into a mechanical calm that made the mercenaries violently shiver. "The federal grand jury opens in exactly 4 hours, and I do not tolerate administrative delays." At exactly 4:02 a.m., inside the high security, glass-enclosed emergency trading floor of Apex Horizon National Bank, the atmospheric calm was violently shattered by a sudden, rhythmic, and piercing crimson strobe light. It wasn't a standard fire alarm. It was the catastrophic, maximum priority system failure alert of the Central Liquidity Clearinghouse. The massive electronic wallboards, which normally flashed the green, stable flow rates of multi-billion-dollar interbank asset transfers, instantly turned into a solid, blinding sea of dark crimson warning logs. Marcus Cross stood dead center in his executive observation suite, his expensive silk shirt completely unbuttoned at the neck, his face dripping with cold, greasy sweat. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his gold-encrypted communication terminal against his ear as frantic, high-pitched screams from his head currency traders filled the speaker. "The overnight liquidity pools are completely dead, Mr. Cross!" the head trader shrieked, his voice cracking into pure, unadulterated panic. "The Federal Credit Union Alliance just executed a total, coordinated capital extraction. They pulled $15 billion of reciprocal liquidity lines in a single second. Every single automated interbank clearing bridge associated with our clearing sector has just been slammed shut. We are structurally starving. Sir, we don't have the cash reserves to balance our morning clearing accounts. Cook the ledger. Marcus Cross roared back, his voice cracking into a desperate, terrifying scream that echoed off the soundproof glass walls. He violently slammed his fist onto the obsidian desk, shattering a decorative crystal pen holder. Use the offshore buffer coordinates. Manually transfer the $34 million from Vivian Brooks's personal directory into the central settlement account right now. Simulate an automatic consumer trust distribution. Wipe the forensic routing trail before the international pre-market desks open. We can't, sir. The mainframe has compromised our access. The trader yelled back, his voice paralyzed by a profound, primitive terror. The system isn't accepting our executive clearing overrides. The moment we try to touch Vivian Brooks's routing matrix, the entire anti-money laundering firewall completely locks down our terminals. Look at your personal master screen. Mr. Cross! The system! There is a ghost inside the operating network. Marcus Cross spun around, his heart pounding like a sledgehammer against his ribs as he stared at his private, multi-million-dollar administrative computer terminal. The screen had completely frozen, bypassing the bank's sovereign security firewalls. The standard corporate login interface was gone, replaced by a cold, clean, and terrifyingly familiar cryptographic command prompt that wrote itself across the monitor in bright emerald text. Sterling Financial Operations Ovord ACTV. AD Administrative Credentials FOR Marcus Cross. Permanently terminated. Reason. Core compliance violation and wire manipulation detected. Marcus Cross literally stumbled backward, his breath catching entirely inside his throat as his knees turned into weak, useless jelly. He fell heavily into his leather executive chair, staring at the emerald text with his eyes wide, bulging, and filled with a sudden, absolute state of raw horror. He finally recognized the pristine, unbreachable architecture of the software staring back at him. It was the legendary, hidden sovereign mainframe system that controlled the foundational plumbing of the entire country's banking sector. An operating system designed by a nameless, mythical-led architect whom no corporate vice president had ever been permitted to meet. And that nameless architect was the exact woman whose clothes Julian Vance had thrown into the wet mud just hours ago on Pemrook Lane. Vivian, Marcus Cross whispered, his lips turning completely white as his phone began vibrating continuously against the desk, the screen flashing urgent, maximum priority threat notifications from his board of directors, the SEC, and the Central Clearinghouse. She didn't steal the data files. He owns he velt. By 8:30 p.m. that evening, the heavy downpour of rain had transformed the streets surrounding the Obsidian Room private club into a slick, mirror-like expanse of dark asphalt. Inside the premier VIP circular booth, the atmosphere was thick with a toxic, desperate level of newly rich vanity. Julian Vance sat with his arms draped arrogantly over the leather cushions, his face flushed red from a continuous intake of expensive cognac, trying frantically to project an image of absolute, high society triumph to the wealthy investors watching him from the surrounding tables. Sitting right next to him was Valerie, her fingers adorned with multi-carat diamond rings, her face twisted into a sharp, triumphant sneer as she finalized the forged internal corporate embezzlement logs on her digital tablet. Across from them sat Marcus Cross, who had managed to force himself into a rigid, expensive tailored suit, though his pale skin and the continuous twitching of his left eye revealed the terrifying, ticking time bomb waiting to explode beneath his feet. "She's late," Valerie hissed, her voice dripping with pure, unadulterated snobbery as she aggressively checked her diamond-encrusted wristwatch. That submissive little data clerk is probably weeping in her cheap house, trying to gather her courage before she comes here to beg for mercy. The moment she signs the asset waiver, Julian, we will transmit the forged server directories to the local authorities and have her permanently dragged out of our sight. Relax, Valerie, Julian sneered, letting out a loud, mocking laugh as he took a slow sip of his cognac, masking the cold sweat that was beginning to coat his own palms. Vivian has absolutely no cards to play. She is a nameless, charity case orphan who spent 4 years scheduling my scripts and cleaning my house. She doesn't have the financial intelligence or the social leverage to survive a white-collar frame-up. The system always protects billionaires like us. By tomorrow morning, her career will be toxic, her name will be ruined, and I will be signing the $50 million endorsement contract with the DuPont conglomerate. Right on that exact second, the heavy, double-paned glass mahogany doors of the Obsidian Room private club were quietly opened. The loud, chaotic cackle of the high society dining room instantly began to freeze, table by table, as a cold, majestic, and completely suffocating aura invaded the space. Walking through the entrance was not the broken, weeping, and terrified data clerk they had spent the entire evening mocking. It was me. I walked down the grand marble aisle of the club, my posture radiating an ancient, untouchable old money sovereignty that immediately commanded the absolute silence of everyone in the room. I had completely discarded the simple, unbranded gray trench coat. I was dressed in an elegant, highly structured, form-fitting deep teal crew-neck sheath dress of absolute haute couture perfection. The rich, dark teal fabric featured prominent vertical tailoring princess seams running down the front bodice, sharply sculpting a flawless hourglass silhouette and accentuating a sharply defined waistline. My voluminous dark hair cascaded over my shoulder, and my piercing emerald eyes flashed with a sub-zero, untouchable peace that caused Julian's crystal glass to instantly freeze halfway to his lips. Behind me, walking in perfect, clinical step, was Dominic Sterling, carrying a slim, metallic forensic briefcase, his eyes fixed on the parasites with the cold detachment of a modern executioner. Julian Vance slowly, pathetically stumbled to his feet, his mouth hanging open in a silent, horrified gasp as he stared at my transformation. The sheer, regal power radiating from my appearance completely shattered the fragile, arrogant illusion of his newly rich vanity. "Vivian," Julian stammered, his handsome voice completely losing all of its smooth celebrity confidence, cracking into a desperate, high-pitched squeak. What? What is the meaning of this outfit? Why are you dressed like a sterling executive? Sit down right now and sign the asset waivers before I have club security violently remove you from this table. I stepped directly to the edge of their circular booth, completely ignoring his loud posturing. I placed my hands calmly against the dark leather trim, leaning forward until my emerald eyes were inches away from his sweating face, my voice dropping into a mechanical, terrifyingly clear tone that vibrated through the silent room. "Julian," I whispered, a cold, confident smile stretching across my sculpted lips. "Your club security cannot protect an empire that has already been completely starved of its infrastructure. The asset waivers you placed on this table are nothing but scrap paper. Because before I walked through those revolving doors tonight, your venture firm, your bank lines, and your entire high society dynasty were permanently deleted from the financial matrix. The pristine, high society silence that had slowly paralyzed the Obsidian Room VIP dining suite did not just crack. It completely collapsed into a terrifying, chaotic vacuum of pure, unadulterated panic. Marcus Cross, the senior vice president who had sat behind his gold-plated accessories just minutes ago, radiating an absolute wall of institutional immunity, was now hyperventilating so violently that his expensive silk necktie was visibly soaking with a cold, greasy layer of sweat. His manicured hands shook with an erratic, uncontrolled tremor as he frantically swiped across his flashing smartphone screen, watching his master security access codes to the Apex Horizon National Bank central mainframe turn into a solid, blinding wall of dark crimson termination notices. "This is an administrative error! A catastrophic systemic glitch!" Marcus Cross suddenly shrieked, his smooth, corporate voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine that cut clean through the ambient atmosphere of the private club. He violently stood up from the circular booth, knocking his heavy leather chair backward, sending it crashing violently against the decorative glass partition. He lunged across the table, his trembling fingers clawing desperately at the lapels of Julian Vance's tailored Italian suit. "You told me the offshore logistics directory was completely invisible! Julian! You swore on your family's asset lineage that the international routing trail was locked behind an unbreachable cryptographic firewall. The federal compliance bots just bypassed our entire database encryptor. My administrative clearance is permanently revoked. The executive board is executing an emergency asset freeze on my entire sector." Julian Vance stumbled backward into the leather cushions of the booth, his face turning a sickly, hollow shade of ash gray as the primitive, freezing reality of his actions ripped through his chest like a physical steel blade. The crystal glass of 50-year-old cognac slipped entirely from his frozen fingers, shattering violently against the marble floor, pooling expensive liquor over the scattered, torn remnants of my post-nuptial asset waivers. "Get your hands off me, Marcus!" Julian roared back in absolute, unyielding despair, his chest heaving as he frantically tried to shove the panicking banker away from his throat. He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot, wide, and bulging out of his skull as if he were staring at a ghost that had just risen from the center of the earth. "Vivian, stop this! Turn off the network override right now! You are nothing but a low-wage data clerk. You do not possess the legal authority to trigger an SEC forensic audit against a Tier 1 investment firm. Who gave you these cryptographic mainframe files?" Valerie Vance completely lost every single ounce of her snobbish, aristocratic composure. Her face, usually mask-like and rigid with premium cosmetics, contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged venom. She grabbed her thick leather designer briefcase, her long fingernails violently digging into the leather as she scrambled to pull out her personal communication tablet, her fingers flying across the keys to execute an emergency deletion of their offshore laundering directories. "Delete the servers, Julian! Wipe the logistics database right now!" Valerie screamed, her high-pitched voice rising into a terrifying, hoarse shriek that drew the immediate attention of every diamond-encrusted investor in the dining room. "She's bluffing! This broke orphan girl doesn't own a single fraction of our capital. She's using old data files she stole from the compliance basement. Call the club security! Have this faithless thief violently thrown out into the rain? Nobody touch those electronic directories! Federal agents! Stand down!" A thunderous, authoritative voice roared from the entrance of the VIP suite. Before Valerie could even press the master deletion command, the heavy, double-paned mahogany doors of the Obsidian Room were violently thrown open with a powerful, echoing crash that silenced the entire private club. 8 towering, heavily armed federal tactical officers from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division and the Federal Bureau of Investigation marched into the room in perfect, military-grade formation. They were accompanied by 3 white-coated forensic technology investigators carrying secure digital data capture hubs. Leading the entire federal enforcement detail was Dominic Sterling, his face an unyielding, frozen wall of absolute legal execution, holding a high-priority, red-stamped judicial seizure mandate bearing the supreme gold seal of the United States District Court. "Vivian Brooks." "No, Chairman Vivian Sterling," Dominic said, stepping to my side, bowing his head with absolute, religious reverence as he placed the authenticated federal indictment files onto the table directly in front of Julian's frozen face. "The Master Financial Crimes Detail has secured the perimeter. The offshore buffer servers have been completely duplicated and seized by our legal trust. The parasites are officially contained." One of the towering federal tactical marshals lunged forward, his heavy tactical boot stomping directly onto Valerie's leather briefcase, pinning it to the floor before she could hide it. With a swift, mechanical movement, he slapped her hand away from the communication tablet and violently pulled her arms behind her back, clicking a heavy pair of cold steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists with a definitive, metallic snap. "Valerie Vance, you are officially under arrest for international wire fraud, systemic money laundering, and corporate document destruction," the agent announced coldly, forcing her out of the luxury booth. Valerie let out a sharp, hysterical shriek, her mink coat sliding off her shoulders into the spilled liquor on the floor, her diamond necklaces rattling horribly as she was subdued. Julian Vance completely collapsed onto his knees against the hard marble, his body convulsing with a visceral state of raw horror. The self-proclaimed venture capital titan of high society was now crawling through the wet debris, reaching his trembling, sweat-drenched hands toward the hem of my tailored deep teal dress, weeping like a broken, dying animal. "Vivian, please! Look at me!" Julian sobbed, his voice cracking into a desperate, high-pitched whine that echoed across the silent club. "I was an arrogant fool! I didn't know your true name was Sterling! I was manipulated by my sister and Marcus Cross! They told me your compliance background made you the perfect fall address for the international debts! Save me! Vivian, I am your husband! You can't let them drag me to a federal cage." I stood perfectly straight at the summit of the room, my hands calmly folded behind the back of my structured teal dress, looking down at the groveling coward with an icy, absolute, and utterly glacial calm. "The system always protects the crown, Julian," I whispered, repeating the exact words Marcus Cross had used against me just minutes ago. "And tonight, your crown has just been permanently liquidated." The grand, vaulted federal courtroom of the Southern District of New York was packed to absolute capacity with international financial journalists, corporate compliance executives, and high society investors. The air inside smelled of old paper, heavy wood, and the chilling finality of judicial obliteration. The media circus outside had been raging for 3 solid months, as the public systematically watched the glamorous, fake empire of Vance Venture Capital get stripped down to its bare, fraudulent bones. Julian Vance stood behind the dark mahogany defense podium, his body visibly shaking underneath a coarse, brilliant orange inmate jumpsuit. The expensive Italian suits, the custom leather loafers, and the arrogant, narcissistic smile were permanently gone. His face was hollow, pale, and covered in a shadow of dark stress, his eyes bloodshot from months of sleepless nights inside the federal detention facility. Standing right next to him, similarly dressed in prison orange, was Valerie Vance, her head hanging low, her aristocratic pride completely shattered into nothingness. Across the aisle, Marcus Cross sat with his head buried in his hands, completely abandoned by the executive board of his bank. The honorable federal judge adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the massive, multi-thousand-page forensic accounting ledger prepared by Dominic Sterling and my private anti-money laundering transaction monitoring architecture. She slammed her heavy wooden gavel down with a thunderous, echoing crash that silenced every whisper in the room. After a comprehensive review of the digital routing registries, the judge announced, her voice carrying the mechanical, unyielding weight of federal law, "This court finds the defendants guilty on all core criminal counts." Julian Vance and Valerie Vance did not simply engage in aggressive venture trading. They deliberately, maliciously engineered a highly structured international money laundering operation. They weaponized a misdirected $34 million shadow wire transfer, utilizing a non-registered offshore buffer entity, and intentionally targeted the personal account of Vivian Brooks as a dead-end fall address to deceive federal oversight bots and execute a malicious corporate frame-up. The judge turned her piercing gaze directly onto Julian, her face hardening into an expression of absolute, uncompromising severity. "Julian Vance, for the crimes of grand bank fraud, international wire manipulation, and criminal conspiracy, I hereby sentence you to 10 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, with absolutely zero eligibility for early release or parole. Furthermore, under federal asset forfeiture mandates, every single cent of your private investment accounts, your luxury vehicles, and your real estate holdings is permanently seized to satisfy the massive civil liabilities owed to the state." Julian let out a loud, suffocating gasp, his knees literally buckling beneath him as 2 federal marshals caught his arms, preventing him from collapsing onto the floor. "Valerie Vance," the judge continued, her gavel poised, "for your primary role in structuring the offshore logistics directories and attempting the destruction of federal evidence, you were sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Valerie covered her face with her chained hands, weeping uncontrollably as the dark reality of her cage became absolute. Marcus Cross, the judge's voice dropped into a sub-zero freeze as she looked at the trembling vice president. You abused the sacred institutional trust of the banking sector to facilitate criminal capital clearance. You are hereby sentenced to 30 SIN/6 months in a federal penitentiary and are permanently, unconditionally barred from ever working in the financial, banking, or fiduciary industries for the remainder of your natural life. Finally, the judge lifted a secondary legal decree, stamping it with a loud, definitive thump. Apex Horizon National Bank is hereby entered into a strict federal consent order for total structural noncompliance. The institution is ordered to pay a historic civil penalty of $12 million for its systemic failure to monitor high-velocity shadow transactions and its executive complicity in this laundering ring. The heavy iron chains around Julian's ankles rattled horribly against the hardwood floor as the marshals began dragging him away toward the dark extraction elevators. He looked back toward the gallery one final time, his eyes desperately tracking the crowd until they landed on me. I sat in the very front row of the gallery, completely majestic, my posture radiating an untouchable, sovereign grace. Dominic stood right beside me, holding my leather portfolio. My hazel green eyes met Julian's desperate, weeping gaze with an untouchable, imperial peace. He had believed that because I chose to work quietly, live humbly, and manage his domestic files without bragging about my lineage, I was an easy target to be crushed and blamed for his sins. He forgot the ultimate law of the modern financial universe. Never try to steal from the architect who built the vault. The final financial shockwaves triggered by the federal consent order did not simply destabilize the executive board of Apex Horizon National Bank. They initiated a total, uncontrollable economic implosion that completely wiped their name from the commercial world. Following the public enforcement of the historic $12 million civil penalty and the immediate, permanent revocation of the Sterling Global Trust's transactional clearing licenses, the bank's stock value experienced a catastrophic overnight crash. Within 48 hours, panic-stricken institutional investors withdrew billions of dollars of liquidity, forcing federal regulators to step in, freeze the vaults, and permanently liquidate the corrupt institution forever. But the true, quantified karma was not measured in corporate balance sheets or regulatory press releases. It was executed with chilling, mechanical precision inside the cold, gray concrete walls of the federal correctional facilities. Julian Vance, the flashy, hyper-narcissistic venture capital director who once wore custom-tailored European silk shirts and spent his evenings drinking 50-year-old cognac while plotting my total social ruin, had officially become an absolute nobody. The grand, bloated illusion of his high society prestige was permanently stripped away, replaced by the harsh, monotonous reality of a 10-year federal prison sentence. Every single morning at exactly 5:30 a.m., Julian is violently jolted awake by the loud, metallic screech of the cell block doors. He no longer steps into a leased luxury hypercar. He steps onto the freezing concrete floor of the prison's industrial laundry facility, dressed in a rough, faded orange inmate jumpsuit with his federal registration number crudely stamped across his chest. His soft, manicured hands, which once signed fraudulent post-nuptial asset waivers to dump his quiet wife into the mud, are now covered in thick, industrial rubber gloves. He spends 8 grueling hours a day lifting heavy, wet sheets, inhaling toxic bleach fumes, and manually scrubbing the interior drums of massive commercial washing machines for exactly 14 cents an hour. He spends his minimal recreation hours sitting entirely alone in the corner of a dusty concrete yard, completely isolated from the other inmates. The high society investors and wealthy country club friends he once scammed have completely deleted his existence from their networks. He is radioactive. He is a convicted federal fraud. His toxic, arrogant sister, Valerie Vance, faces an equally devastating and true reality inside the women's medium security facility. The elite corporate human resources matriarch who once treated me like an embarrassing, lower-class maid who belonged in the dirt has been assigned to the lowest level of facility maintenance. Valerie spends her days holding a rusted metal mop and a cracked plastic bucket, manually scrubbing the greasy floors of the prison cafeteria and emptying heavy waste bins under the watchful eyes of institutional guards. The diamond necklaces, the designer furs, and the expensive cosmetics have been replaced by heavy iron ankle chains, a concrete bunk, and the bitter taste of total social liquidation. Meanwhile, Marcus Cross, the former senior vice president who believed his executive bank credentials gave him the absolute power to forge registries and manipulate the system, sits inside his isolated cell block, permanently ruined. The judicial declaration didn't just take his physical freedom, it permanently, unconditionally stripped him of his financial credentials. When his 36-month sentence concludes, he will step out into a world where it is legally impossible for him to even touch a financial spreadsheet or apply for a fiduciary license. He has been completely, materially liquidated by the exact compliance firewalls he tried to exploit. 1 full year has passed since the night the $34 million shadow wire transfer materialized inside my personal ledger, activating the ultimate compliance downfall of the Vance family dynasty. The quiet, submissive life of Vivian Brooks, the low-wage data clerk who endured the continuous snobbery and verbal abuse of a toxic husband to honor her grandfather's doctrine of stealth wealth, has officially concluded. I completely resigned from the insurance firm, closing that chapter of hidden surveillance forever, and stepped into my rightful position as the senior principal compliance consultant and transaction monitoring architect for the Western Financial Coalition. I no longer spend my days hiding behind anonymous database firewalls. Today, my private consulting firm advises Tier 1 credit unions, community banks, and federal regulatory agencies on how to implement unbreachable anti-money laundering controls and construct zero-hour forensic transaction architecture. The very systems I designed are now actively protecting thousands of ordinary, hard-working citizens from being weaponized as buffer entities by white-collar parasites. One of my very first executive decisions following the trial was to permanently sever all personal connections with commercial banking cartels. I completely closed every single directory account associated with Apex Horizon National Bank and safely transferred my generational capital into a secure, community-focused credit union. An institution built on transparent, verified asset management where corporate corruption is physically impossible. But despite my access to the massive, multi-million-dollar reserves of the Sterling Global Trust, I did not choose to purchase a flashy, ostentatious mega mansion in the gated high society districts. I chose to remain exactly where my true peace resided, inside my beautiful, historic brick house on Pemrook Lane. The house no longer looks like the quiet, weathered structure that Julian Vance tried to banish me from. Using my independent, cleared consulting revenues, I executed a complete, magnificent structural restoration of the property. The roof has been entirely replaced with premium, dark slate tiles that glisten beautifully under the morning sun, and the exterior walls have been finished with a brilliant, fresh coat of pristine white paint that radiates an aura of clean, quiet elegance. The front garden is filled with blooming green hedges, a serene sanctuary where I spend my quiet evenings holding a warm cup of tea, watching the sunset cast a golden glow across the street. Every single afternoon, Dominic Sterling drives his black luxury sedan up the driveway, delivering the updated compliance directories and forensic audits from our global network. But we do not talk about Julian, Valerie, or Marcus Cross anymore. Their names have been permanently archived under the Federal Registry of Liquidated Entities. They have become nothing but a distant, silent footnote in the ledger of my life. Julian Vance and his family truly believed that because I chose to live quietly, dress simply, and manage their chaotic domestic documents with silence, I was a helpless, nameless worker who could be easily framed, humiliated, and destroyed to protect their fake vanity. They forgot the foundational, unyielding doctrine of the old money financial universe: never mistake humility for weakness. Because the quiet, ordinary compliance clerk sitting in the basement office next to you today might just be the sovereign architect who owns the entire vault tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening to this complete story on Cold Calm Stories 1. If you believe that true integrity always outlasts arrogant parasites, and that karma always delivers the absolute perfect audit to the wicked, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more deep dive dramatic tales. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you in the next story.